They treated her like a disposable servant, a wolfless embarrassment fit only for mopping up spills. For 19 years, Tiffany Abrams was the invisible stain on the pack's reputation, tormented, broken, and ignored. But when the vain alpha Jason Sulla publicly rejects her to preserve his social standing, he commits a catastrophic mistake. He doesn't just shatter her heart, he snaps the suppression seal, locking away her bloodline. What emerges from the agony of his rejection isn't a weak omega. It is a deity of old, the silver wolf. Now the Alpha King has descended from the north, the true queen has risen, and the girl they used for target practice is about to force the entire pack to bow. The cavernous ballroom of the pack house smelled of winter cedar, expensive musk, and the sharp, electric scent of adrenaline. It was the night of the Winter Solstice Ball, the most critical evening in the werewolf dominion. Tonight, powerful alphas from across the territory would converge under the golden lights to negotiate treaties and, if the fates allowed, identify their destined mates. Tiffany Abrams was on her knees, invisible beneath the sea of silk and tuxedos. She was scrubbing a red wine stain from the white marble floor, armed with a rag that was gray with overuse. Her hands were raw and trembling, the skin across her knuckles split from the biting chemicals of the cleaning solution. She was 19, the age by which any normal wolf would have shifted and secured a rank. But Tiffany was an anomaly. She was the defect, the omega who possessed no inner wolf to protect her. "Missed a spot, runt." The voice was sharp and cold, like crushing ice. Tiffany didn't need to raise her eyes to know it was Ruxun Ullun. Ruxun was the secondary antagonist of Tiffany's life, a cruel beauty with dark intentions who walked the halls as if she already wore the alpha's ring. Tiffany kept her head bowed, scrubbing faster, praying to disappear. "I'm almost done, Ruxun, please." Crunch! A stiletto heel drove down onto Tiffany's wrist, pinning her bone against the unforgiving floor. Tiffany gasped, choking back a scream of pain. "That is future Luna to you," Ruxun hissed, leaning her weight into the heel, her shadow swallowing Tiffany's small frame. "And don't think for a second you're slipping out to the kitchens to eat. Alpha Jason wants the entire entryway gleaming before the High Council arrives. Every inch." Tiffany's voice shook. "But the ceremony begins in 30 minutes. The staff were told we could stand in the back." Ruxun laughed, a hollow, mocking sound that drew the amusement of the guards stationed at the door. "Stand in the back. You think a wolfless waste of space deserves to breathe the same air as the Alpha King? You're a genetic error, Tiffany. Honestly, Jason is a saint for letting you sleep indoors. If I had my way, you'd be sleeping in the kennels with the strays." With a vicious kick, Ruxun knocked over the bucket of dirty water, sending a wave of gray sludge across the pristine floor Tiffany had just finished drying. "Fix it," Ruxun sneered, stepping back to avoid the splash. "And if I see your pathetic face anywhere near the main festivities, I'll have you dragged to the borders and left for the rogues." As Ruxun strutted away, leaving the scent of cloying perfume in her wake, Tiffany was left shivering in the spreading puddle. She blinked back the hot tears threatening to spill. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. In this pack, tears were just blood in the water for the sharks. But tonight felt heavy. Tonight, Alpha Jason Sulla was actively hunting for a mate to solidify his power. Tiffany wiped her cheek with a wet hand, a terrifying, magnetic heat already simmering in her veins whenever she thought of him. She begged the moon goddess that her instincts were wrong, because for a broken omega like her, being fated to an alpha as vain as Jason wouldn't be a salvation. It would be a death sentence. The water was freezing, soaking through the knees of her threadbare trousers as she desperately soaked up the gray sludge Ruxun had created. Tiffany bit the inside of her cheek, tasting copper. It was the only way to ground herself, to keep the humiliation from burning her alive. She caught her reflection in the wet marble, a ghost of a girl. Her what blonde hair had escaped its messy bun, framing a face that was too thin, too pale, with violet eyes that always seemed too big for her skull. She looked fragile, like a porcelain doll left out in the rain. It was a stark, painful contrast to Ruxun, who was all sharp angles, dark gloss, and predatory grace. Ruxun was a weapon, Tiffany was the target. "Move it, runt," a guard barked, kicking at her mop bucket as he held the double doors open. A gust of wind blew in, carrying the scent of snow and expensive cologne. The guests were arriving. Tiffany scrambled to her feet, her joints popping in protest. She grabbed her supplies and ducked into the narrow servants' corridor hidden behind a velvet tapestry. The darkness of the tunnel was a comfort compared to the glare of the ballroom. Here, in the damp quiet, she could breathe. She leaned her head against the cold stone wall, closing her eyes. Through the thick masonry, she could feel the vibration of the string quartet tuning their instruments. It was a sound of pure magic, a melody that promised waltzes, laughter, and heat. Just one night, she thought, a dangerous ache blooming in her chest. She didn't want to be Luna. She didn't want power. She just wanted to step out of the shadows and be seen, not as a stain on the floor, but as a person. She wanted to wear silk instead of rags, to feel the warmth of a mate's hand instead of the bite of lye soap. But dreams were dangerous for the wolfless. She pushed off the wall, wiping her damp hands on her apron. She had finished the floor, but the night was far from over. Somewhere out there, amidst the clinking crystal and golden light, Alpha Jason was waiting. And despite the terror that curled in her gut, the magnetic pull in her blood was getting stronger, dragging her inevitably toward the one thing she knew would destroy her. The service corridor was suffocating, a narrow artery of stone running parallel to the beating heart of the pack house. Tiffany knew she should retreat to her attic closet, bury herself under her thin blankets, and wait for the morning's inevitable hangover of cleaning duties. But the pull was a physical tether, a hook buried in her sternum dragging her toward the ventilation grate that overlooked the grand ballroom. She pressed her face against the cold iron slats. Below, the world was a kaleidoscope of velvet gowns and flashing jewels. The air drifting up was thick with the pheromones of powerful wolves, a heady mix of cedar, rose, and musk that made her head swim. And then she saw him. Alpha Jason Sulla stood near the dais, a glass of amber whiskey loosely gripped in his hand. He looked bored, his dark hair swept back, his storm-gray eyes scanning the crowd with the detached arrogance of a king surveying his subjects. He was undeniably magnificent, radiating a raw power that made the space around him seem to warp. Tiffany's breath hitched. She meant to look away to save herself the torment, but at that exact moment, Jason's head snapped up. It duffed logic. She was 50 feet above him, hidden in the shadows, her scent masked by the bleach and lye clinging to her skin. Yet his gaze locked instantly onto the grate. The impact was physical. A shockwave slammed into Tiffany's chest, stealing the air from her lungs. It wasn't the gentle flutter of butterflies the storybooks promised. It was a collision. A searing heat erupted in her belly, molten and terrifying, racing through her veins like wildfire. Her inner world, usually silent and empty, suddenly screamed a single, undeniable word that echoed in her marrow. "Mate." Down on the ballroom floor, the whiskey glass slipped from Jason's fingers. It shattered against the marble, the sharp crash silencing the string quartet. Jason didn't blink. He didn't look at the mess. His chest heaved, his nostrils flaring wide as he inhaled deeply, hunting for something that had just cut through the cloying perfumes of the court. Alpha, a dignitary beside him, stepped back, alarmed by the sudden change in his demeanor. "Is something wrong?" "Rain," Jason whispered, his voice rough, barely human. "Rain and milk and honey." The scent was driving him mad. It was sweet, pure, and intoxicatingly heavy, overriding every other instinct in his body. His wolf, usually a disciplined beast, was clawing at the surface, roaring to find the source. Mine. Find her, claim her. He shoved past the dignitary, ignoring the gasps of the crowd. He moved with predatory speed, tracking the invisible ribbon of scent that led away from the party and toward the hidden service doors. Up in the vent, Tiffany scrambled backward, panic clawing at her throat. No, 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 this couldn't be happening. She was a defect, he was the alpha. This was a cosmic joke. She stumbled to her feet, turning to run back down the dark corridor, but the heavy oak door at the end of the hall exploded open. Jason stood in the frame, his chest heaving, his eyes glowing with a feral silver luminescence. He looked wild, unhinged by the pull. He didn't see a servant, he saw only the destination of his soul. "There you are," he growled, the sound vibrating through the stone floor and straight into Tiffany's bones. She couldn't move. The biological imperative paralyzed her, demanding she submit, demanding she go to him. She trembled as he stalked toward her, closing the distance in 3 long strides. The air around him smelled of ozone and an approaching storm, the scent of power. He crowded her against the rough wall, his hands slamming on either side of her head, caging her in. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling sharply. The contact sent sparks skittering across her skin, a pleasure so intense her knees buckled. "You smell," Jason murmured, his lips brushing the pulse point of her throat, his voice thick with lust. "You smell like salvation." For one delirious heartbeat, Tiffany let herself believe. She let herself melt into the heat, her hands instinctively rising to touch his chest. Maybe the stories were wrong. Maybe the bond conquered all. Then Jason pulled back to look at his prize. The hallway was dim, but the light from the open door cast a harsh beam across her face. He blinked, the lust in his eyes flickering as his vision cleared. He looked at the gray, oversized cleaning uniform. He looked at the red, cracked hands resting on his tuxedo jacket. Finally, he looked at her face, the pale hair, the violet eyes, the smudge of dirt on her cheek. The recognition hit him like a bucket of ice water. Jason froze. The heat radiating from him turned instantly cold. He took a step back, his hands recoiling from the wall as if he had touched a hot stove. The wonder in his expression curdled into something horrified. "You," he breathed, the word dripping with disbelief. "The cleaning girl, the runt." Tiffany shrank against the stone, the rejection in his voice striking her harder than Lyra's heel ever could. The bond was still screaming, pulling them together, but Jason was fighting it with everything he had. He looked at her not as his soulmate, but as a stain he had accidentally touched. It must be a mistake," she whispered, her voice cracking. "A mistake," Jason laughed, but there was no humor in it, only panic and revulsion. He wiped his hands on his pants. "A mistake doesn't begin to cover it. You are nothing. You are a genetic dead end." He stared at her, the milk and honey scent still taunting him, warring with his massive ego. He was Alpha Jason solely. He was meant to mate with a warrior, a queen, not the broken thing that scrubbed his toilets. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "Do not move." He turned on his heel and stormed back toward the light of the ballroom, leaving Tiffany alone in the dark, the echo of the word nothing ringing in her ears. 2 guards materialized from the shadows of the corridor, their grip on Tiffany's arms bruising and absolute. She didn't have time to ask where they were taking her before they hauled her forward, feet skidding on the stone, and shoved her through the double doors into the blinding brilliance of the grand ballroom. The music died instantly. The hush that fell over the room was heavier than the crystal chandeliers overhead. Hundreds of eyes, the elite, the powerful, the cruel, swiveled to land on the small, trembling figure in the stained gray uniform. Tiffany fell to her knees, the impact jarring her teeth. She scrambled to cover herself, to hide her raw hands and the dirt on her cheek, but there was nowhere to hide. The polished floor reflected her shame like a mirror. "Get up," a voice boomed, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Tiffany looked up through her lashes. Alpha Jason stood on the dais, flanked by the High Council. The conflict she had seen in the hallway was gone, replaced by a mask of cold, imperious disdain. He looked at her not as a mate, but as a tumor that needed to be cut out to save the body. "Alpha, please," Tiffany whispered, the bond in her chest throbbing with a desperate, pathetic hope. "I didn't choose this." "Silence," Jason roared. The power of his alpha command slammed into her, forcing her head down. He turned to the crowd, his gray eyes sweeping over the visiting dignitaries, seeing the confusion and judgment on their faces. He knew what they were thinking. An alpha mated to a wolfless runt was weak, a liability. "Tonight, the moon goddess has tested this pack," Jason announced, his voice steady but laced with venom. "She has paired a predator with prey to see if I possess the strength to choose the pack over my own base instincts." He stepped down from the dais, stalking toward Tiffany until his patent leather shoes filled her vision. He circled her, letting the court see the stark contrast between his power and her frailty. "Look at her," Jason sneered, gesturing to her huddled form. "She has no wolf. She has no strength. She cannot shift, she cannot hunt, and she certainly cannot lead. To accept a mate like this would be to doom the Eclipsed Moon Pack to a lineage of weakness." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Roxane, standing near the front, smirked, twirling a lock of hair around her finger. Tiffany's heart hammered against her ribs. "Jason, don't," she begged, the tears finally spilling over. "The bond, it hurts." "It is a biological error," Jason spat. "A glitch, and I am correcting it." He stopped in front of her, forcing her to look up into his stormy eyes. There was no love there. Only the cold calculation of a man saving his reputation at the cost of her life. The air in the room grew static-charged as he drew in a breath to speak the ancient words. "I, Alpha Jason Solely of the Eclipsed Moon Pack." "No," Tiffany screamed, reaching out, her fingers grazing his pant leg. He kicked her hand away. "Reject you, Tiffany Abrams, as my mate and Luna." The words hit her like a physical blow. It wasn't just emotional heartbreak, it was a metaphysical severing. A sound like a snapping cable echoed through the silent hall. Tiffany doubled over, a scream tearing from her throat as a searing, white-hot agony ripped through her chest. It felt as though her soul was being torn in half. She gasped for air, clutching her heart, waiting for him to finish the ritual, to accept her rejection and end the pain. But Jason wasn't finished. He looked at the sobbing mess on his floor and realized that as long as she was here, smelling of milk and honey, he would be tempted. He would look weak. He needed to erase the mistake entirely. And Jason added, his voice dropping to a lethal, final tone, "I will not have a rejected cur lurking in my halls, reminding me of this humiliation." He signaled the guards. "Escort her to the borders. She is banished to the rogue lands, effective immediately." Gasps erupted from the crowd. The rogue lands in the dead of winter were a graveyard. No human, and barely any wolf, could survive the freezing forests without a pack. "Jason, you can't," Tiffany choked out, blood dripping from her nose where the pressure of the rejection had burst a vessel. "It's freezing. I have no coat. I have no wolf. I'll die." Jason turned his back on her, walking toward Roxane and taking her hand. He didn't look back. "Then die quickly," he said, signaling the band to resume playing. "Get this trash out of my house." The guards seized Tiffany by her arms, dragging her backward across the marble. She screamed his name, her heels scraping uselessly against the floor, leaving streaks of dirt and despair. The heavy oak doors swung open, revealing the swirling blizzard outside. The wind howled, sounding like a hungry beast waiting to be fed. With a final heave, they threw her out into the snow. The doors slammed shut with a definitive boom, muffling the music and the warmth, leaving Tiffany alone in the killing cold. The snow wasn't cold, it was scorching. Tiffany landed hard on the frozen cobblestones, the breath driven from her lungs. The blizzard howled around her, burying her in white drifts within seconds, but the real storm was raging inside her ribcage. The metaphysical severing of the rejection bond hadn't just cut the tie to Jason. It had torn through the suppression seal that had bound her bloodline for 19 years. She curled into a ball, screaming into the wind, but the sound that tore from her throat wasn't human. Her skin felt too tight. Her bones felt like glass shattering under the weight of a sledgehammer. The pain was absolute, a white-hot lava coursing through her veins, burning away the weakness, burning away the fear, burning away the girl. "Let us out," a voice commanded from the depths of her soul. It wasn't the whisper of a weak Omega. It was the roar of an ancient legion. Tiffany's back arched off the ground, her spine elongated with a sickening crunch that echoed louder than the gale. The gray cleaning uniform shredded as muscle and fur burst through her skin. This wasn't the shift of a common wolf, messy and painful. This was an explosion of divine energy. She grew and grew and grew. When her paws finally hit the snow, the ground trembled. She stood nearly 7 feet at the shoulder, a behemoth of pure muscle and magic. Her fur was not the gray of a common wolf, nor the black of an alpha. It was silver, bright, blinding, liquid moonlight that seemed to glow against the darkness of the winter night. Inside the ballroom, the orchestra was playing a waltz. Alpha Jason was laughing at something Roxane whispered in his ear, raising his glass to a toast. Boom! The heavy oak doors, reinforced with steel bands to withstand siege, shuddered violently. The music faltered. "Just the wind," Jason announced, though his grip on his glass tightened. "The storm is." Crash! The wood splintered. The massive iron hinges shrieked in protest. "What is that?" Roxane shrieked, backing away. With a final, deafening explosion of timber and twisted metal, the doors blew inward. Debris flew across the polished marble floor like shrapnel, sending guests screaming and diving for cover. Silence fell, absolute and terrified. The freezing wind swirled into the warm room, extinguishing the candles near the entrance. Through the hole where the doors had been, a beast stepped in. The silver wolf lowered her massive head, her golden eyes burning with a supernatural intelligence. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked directly at Jason. A low growl rumbled from her chest, a sound so deep it vibrated in the wine glasses on the tables, cracking the crystal. Jason froze. His face went ashen, the color draining away to leave him looking like a corpse. He took a staggering step back, his alpha instinct screaming a single, terrifying word: predator. This wasn't an Omega. This wasn't a runt. This was a god, and he had just thrown her into the snow. The silver wolf stepped fully into the light. Her aura hit the room like a physical shockwave. It wasn't just fear, it was the crushing weight of royalty. Wolves, regardless of rank, fell to their knees. Their knees hit the marble not by choice, but because their biology demanded they submit to the apex. Roxane was on the floor, whimpering, clutching Jason's leg. Even Jason, the arrogant alpha, was trembling, fighting the urge to bare his neck. "Kill it," Jason shouted, his voice cracking, desperate bravado masking his terror. "Guards, kill the monster." The guards didn't move. They couldn't. They were pressed to the floor, whining like pups. The silver wolf opened her jaws and let out a roar that shattered every remaining window in the hall. It was a declaration of war, a promise of retribution. Then a slow, rhythmic clapping echoed from the shadows of the upper balcony. The silver wolf paused, her golden ears swiveling. From the darkness, a figure vaulted over the railing, landing in a crouch between the beast and the terrified alpha. He straightened slowly, brushing invisible dust from his black suit. It was Matty Gibbons, the Alpha King. He had watched the abuse, he had watched the rejection, and now he watched the resurrection. Matty didn't draw a weapon. He didn't flinch as the massive jaws of the silver wolf hovered inches from his face. Instead, his cold black eyes softened, filling with an emotion the court had never seen from the ruthless king: reverence. "I have looked for you for a century," Matty whispered, his voice carrying through the silent hall. He sank to one knee. The Alpha King, the ruler of the continent, bowed his head low. exposing his neck to the beast everyone else had called a mistake. "My queen," Maddie murmured into the silence, "your throne awaits." Tiffany woke to the scent of winter pine and expensive sandalwood, a scent that was distinctly masculine, powerful, and terrifyingly safe. She shot up, a gasp tearing from her throat. Her body braced for the cold stone of the attic floor, for the biting draft of the servants' quarters, or the sting of a slap for oversleeping. Instead, her hands sank into a duvet softer than anything she had ever touched. The room was massive, bathed in the warm, flickering glow of a hearth large enough to roast a stag. Outside floor-to-ceiling windows, a jagged mountain range pierced the sky, capped with snow. "Easy," a deep voice rumbled from the shadows. "You are safe." Tiffany scrambled backward, pressing her spine against the velvet headboard, pulling the sheet up to her chin. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Sitting in a leather armchair by the fire was the Alpha King, Matty Gibbons. He wasn't wearing his formal suit anymore. He was dressed in a simple gray cashmere sweater that emphasized the width of his shoulders, looking less like a warlord and more like a man, though the lethal grace in his posture remained. "Where am I?" Tiffany whispered, her voice rasping. Memories flashed behind her eyes, the rejection, the snow, the pain, and then the beast. Did I kill them?" "No," Matty said, standing up. He moved slowly, broadcasting every motion so as not to startle her. He walked to the bedside table and poured a glass of water. "Though you would have been within your rights, you merely terrified them. A refreshing change of pace for the Eclipsed Moon Pack, I imagine." He held the glass out. Tiffany hesitated, looking at his hand. It was large, scarred, and capable of crushing bone, yet he held the crystal glass with surprising delicacy. She took it, her fingers brushing his. A spark of electricity, warm and golden, jumped between them. It didn't burn like the rejection, it soothed. "I don't understand," she said, drinking greedily. "I'm a runt, I'm wolfless. How did I shift? Why was I so big?" Matty sat on the edge of the bed, maintaining a respectful distance, yet close enough that his gravity seemed to anchor her spinning world. "You are not a runt, Tiffany, you never were." His black eyes bore into hers, intense and serious. "You are the last of the Argentum line, the Silver Wolves." Tiffany blinked. "That's a myth, a bedtime story." "It is history," Matty corrected gently. "The Argentum were the original royals, wolves blessed directly by the moon goddess with power that transcends the pack hierarchy. They were hunted to near extinction by fanatics who feared their strength. Your parents didn't abandon you, and they weren't weak. They bound your wolf with a blood seal to hide you, to keep you alive until you were strong enough to survive the shift." He reached out, his gaze dropping to her hands. They were resting on the white sheet, still red and angry from years of lye soap, the knuckles swollen where Roxane had crushed them only hours ago. "May I?" Matty asked. Tiffany nodded, entranced. He took her injured hand in his. The contrast was stark, his large, calloused warrior's hand cradling her damaged, fragile one. He didn't look at her hands with the disgust Jason had shown. He looked at them with a simmering, dark fury, not at her but for her. He reached for a small jar on the nightstand, scooping out a cool, herbal balm. As he massaged it into her cracked skin, the pain began to recede, replaced by a tingling warmth. "They used you to clean their filth," Matty murmured, his voice low and dangerous. "They made a queen scrub floors." "I'm not a queen," Tiffany whispered, looking down. "I'm just Tiffany. I couldn't even stop them from hurting me." "You were a child surviving in a den of vipers," Matty said firmly. He finished with the balm and didn't let go of her hand. He brought it up, pressing a soft kiss to her bruised knuckles. The gesture was so tender, so reverent, that Tiffany felt tears prick her eyes again. "You are not alone anymore, little wolf," Matty vowed, his dark eyes locking onto her violet ones. "You are under my protection now. You will heal. You will train. And if anyone from that pack ever tries to make you kneel again, I will burn their world to ash." Tiffany looked at him, really looked at him. For 19 years she had been invisible. She had been a tool, a punching bag, a mistake. But in the reflection of the Alpha King's eyes, she didn't see a victim. She saw someone worthy of being saved. For the first time in her life, the crushing weight of survival lifted, replaced by the sturdy, unbreakable shield of his presence. "Okay," she whispered, her fingers curling around his. Maddie smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his harsh face into something breathtaking. "Rest now. Tomorrow we begin. You have a kingdom to reclaim." Back at the Eclipsed Moon Pack house, the wind whistled mournfully through the shattered entrance, swirling snow over the expensive debris of the ruined ball. Alpha Jason solely stood amidst the wreckage of his own ego, staring at the spot where the silver wolf had stood. He could still feel the phantom weight of her aura. It had been crushing, terrifying, and utterly intoxicating. "Jason, come away from there," Roxane whined, stepping gingerly over a broken chandelier. She reached for his arm, her nails perfectly manicured, her face a mask of annoyance. "The guards will fix the doors. That thing is gone. We're better off without the freak." Jason whipped around, his eyes wild and rimmed with red. He backhanded her hand away with a snarl. "You stupid, short-sighted bitch," he hissed, his voice vibrating with a dangerous tremor. "Did you not see? Did you not smell the power rolling off her?" Roxane recoiled, shock painting her features. "She's a runt, a servant." "She is a silver wolf," Jason roared, the sound echoing off the cracked walls. "She is the Argentum line reborn. She is a nuclear weapon, and I just threw her into the snow because I listened to you." He paced the room, his mind racing, rewriting history to suit his greed. He thought of the way the other alphas had knelt. If Tiffany were his Luna, his true Luna, he wouldn't just be a pack alpha. He would be an emperor. He had held the key to ultimate dominion in his hand, and he had treated it like a paperweight. "Get the car," Jason commanded, his gray eyes narrowing into slits of cold determination. "Call the council. Wake Elder Michael." "What are you going to do?" Roxane asked, her voice trembling. "I'm going to get my property back." The northern citadel was a fortress of black stone and ice, impenetrable to any army, except, perhaps, the bureaucracy of the Wolf Council. 3 days after the solstice, the calm of the citadel was shattered. Alarms blared from the watchtowers. Maddie stood on the battlements, Tiffany wrapped in a fur cloak beside him. Below, at the massive iron gates, stood a convoy of armored SUVs flying the flags of the Eclipsed Moon Pack, and more dangerously, the gold and gray banner of the High Council. "Open the gates." Jason's voice was amplified by a megaphone booming up the mountain. "I demand audience with the king. He is harboring a fugitive." Maddie's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. "Stay here," he ordered Tiffany, his voice leaving no room for argument. "He's here for me," Tiffany whispered, her hands gripping the stone railing until her knuckles turned white. "He wants to finish what he started." "He will not touch you," Maddie vowed. He descended to the courtyard as the heavy gates groaned open. He didn't bring an army. His presence alone was enough to lower the temperature in the courtyard by 10 degrees. He walked out to meet them, looking every inch the Alpha King, deadly, calm, and utterly unimpressed. Jason stepped out of the lead vehicle. He looked disheveled, manic. Behind him, 5 figures in gray cloaks emerged from a black limousine. The council. "You have something of mine, Thorne," Jason spat, stepping forward, though he stopped abruptly when Maddie turned his black gaze upon him. "I have a guest under my protection," Maddie replied, his voice a low rumble. "I recall you throwing her into a blizzard to die. That usually signifies a relinquishing of rights." "It was a mistake," Jason shouted, gesturing wildly. "I was under duress. The girl was sick, her scent was wrong. I didn't know she was shifting. You took advantage of the chaos to kidnap my mate." "Your mate," Maddie laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You rejected her, Sterling. The whole court heard it." "The rejection was invalid." Jason countered, pointing a shaking finger at the king. She hadn't shifted yet. The bond wasn't fully formed, so it couldn't be fully broken. She is still the Luna of the eclipsed moon, and I demand you return her. Matty stepped forward, his claws extending, ready to end this farce with blood. Come and take her, boy. Peace, King Matty. The voice was like dry leaves skittering on stone. Elder Michael stepped forward, his blind, white eyes unseeing yet piercing. He raised a withered hand, and the heavy pressure of ancient law settled over the courtyard, stifling Matty's aggression. The Alpha raises a legal point, Michael rasped. The Silver Wolf is a bloodline of immense importance. Her status cannot be left to the whims of emotion. She is not a status symbol, Matty growled. She is a person. She is a disputed asset, Michael corrected coldly. If the rejection was performed on a pre-shifted wolf, the severance is ambiguous in the eyes of the old code. Alpha Jason claims the bond holds. You claim it does not. She stays here, Matty said, placing his hand on the hilt of the dagger at his waist. I don't care about your codes. If you deny the code, you declare war on the council, Michael warned softly. And the purebloods are already stirring in the east. Do you wish to fight a war on two fronts, King Matty? Jason smiled, a cruel, predatory grin returning to his face. He knew Matty couldn't risk a civil war while the pureblood fanatics were hunting them. We are at an impasse, Michael declared. Under the law of duality, when a mate bond is contested, the female must be returned to her pack of origin until a tribunal can be held. I will burn your counsel to the ground before I let her go back to him, Matty threatened, his aura flaring out in a wave of black energy. Then there is only one other way, Michael said, tilting his head. A trial of blood. If she believes herself free, let her prove she is strong enough to stand alone. If she fails, she returns to Alpha Jason. Jason crossed his arms, his eyes gleaming with greed. I accept. I'll drag her home by her hair if I have to. I will fight for her, Matty announced, his voice echoing off the frozen cliffs of the circle of ice. He began to strip off his heavy coat, his muscles coiling with lethal intent. And when I win, I will take your head, Sterling. No, Tiffany said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the icy wind like a blade. Matty froze, turning to look at her with wide, shocked eyes. Tiffany, Matty warned, stepping closer, his voice low. He is a killer. He has been fighting wars since he could walk. You shifted for the first time 3 days ago. Let me end him. Tiffany looked across the frozen lake at Jason, who was stretching, a smug, predatory grin plastered on his face. He looked at her not as an opponent, but as a runaway pet he was about to leash. If Matty fought him, Jason would just see it as another alpha stealing his toy. If you fight him, Tiffany whispered, looking up at Matty, I will always be the weak omega in their eyes. I will always be the girl who needs saving. She squared her shoulders, the trembling in her hands ceasing. I choose no champion. I will fight him myself. A gasp rippled through the spectators, members of the council and Jason's entourage. Jason laughed outright, a harsh, barking sound. You, Jason scoffed. You don't even know how to retract your claws without scratching yourself. I won't fight you, Tiffany. I might break you. Then forfeit, Tiffany said coldly, stepping onto the ice. Jason's smile vanished. His ego wouldn't allow that. Fine. I'll beat you into submission, drag you back to the pack house, and chain you to the bed until you learn your place. Begin, Elder Michael's voice boomed. Jason didn't hesitate. He roared, his body contorting and snapping as he shifted mid-stride. In seconds, a massive midnight black wolf stood on the ice, snarling, saliva dripping from his jaws. He was a prime alpha specimen, fast, brutal, and huge. He charged, claws tearing up the ice, aiming to overwhelm her human form before she could even breathe. Tiffany closed her eyes. She didn't feel fear. She felt the ancient, simmering rage of the goddess in her blood. Let's show them, she thought. With pleasure. A flash of blinding silver light erupted from her body, forcing the spectators to shield their eyes. When the light faded, the silver wolf stood on the ice. She was magnificent, taller than Jason, sleeker, her fur shining like liquid mercury. Jason collided with her, expecting to bowl her over. Instead, it was like running into a mountain. Tiffany didn't budge. She took the impact on her shoulder, dug her claws into the ice, and shoved back. Jason yelped as he was thrown backward, skidding across the frozen lake. He scrambled to his feet, eyes wide with genuine shock. He lunged again, snapping at her throat, but Tiffany was faster. She ducked under his guard, her movements fluid and supernatural, and slammed her flank into his ribs. The crack of bone echoed in the valley. Jason whined, stumbling. From the stands, Roxane watched her future crumbling. Her face twisted in ugly spite. Quietly, she slipped a small, brass blowpipe from her sleeve. It was tipped with a concentrated wolfsbane dart, illegal, dishonorable, and deadly. Mehdi saw the movement. Look out. But the dart was already airborne, a silent streak of death aimed at Tiffany's exposed neck. Tiffany didn't turn. She didn't panic. Her senses, sharpened by the Ajuntum blood, painted a 360-degree picture of the world. She felt the disturbance in the air. With a speed that blurred the eye, she spun around and swatted the air with a massive paw. Clink! The dart skittered harmlessly across the ice. Tiffany turned her golden gaze to the stands, locking eyes with Roxane. She let out a roar that shook the snow off the nearby pine trees, a sound of pure, terrified judgment. Roxane shrieked, dropping the pipe and cowering behind a guard. Jason tried to use the distraction. He launched himself at Tiffany's back, teeth bared. Tiffany anticipated it. She dropped her shoulder, letting him sail over her, then reared up and caught him in midair with her jaws. She clamped down on the scruff of his neck, not to kill but to dominate. She slammed him into the ice. The impact cratered the surface. Tiffany pinned him down, her massive weight crushing the air from his lungs. She stood over him, her golden eyes burning into his terrified gray ones. She tightened her grip on his throat, just enough to let him feel her teeth against his jugular. Submit. The command wasn't spoken. It was a psychic shockwave that flattened everyone in the vicinity. Jason struggled for a second, whining, thrashing against the inevitable, but he was outmatched. He was fighting a god and he was just a man. Slowly, painfully, Jason went limp. He tucked his tail, he bared his throat. It was over. Tiffany released him and stepped back, shifting into her human form. She stood naked and shivering on the ice, but she looked like a queen carved from marble. Mehdi had already vaulted the barrier, wrapping his heavy fur cloak around her shoulders before the crowd could gawk. I yield, Jason gasped, shifting back to his human skin, clutching his broken ribs. He couldn't look her in the eye. I yield, she is yours. She was never yours to give, Mehdi snarled, pulling Tiffany into his chest. Tiffany leaned against the king, the adrenaline crashing, but the victory felt hollow, because deep in her gut, a new fire was starting to burn, hotter than the fight, hotter than the shift. The trial had accelerated her biology. She looked up at Mehdi, her violet eyes wide and feverish. Silas, something is wrong. The moment of victory was shattered not by a cheer, but by a sound that felt like a drill boring into the base of Tiffany's skull. 1 second she was wrapped in Mehdi's fur cloak, the adrenaline of the duel fatting into the feverish, prickling heat of the mating cycle. The next, a high-pitched, oscillating screech tore through the valley. It was a frequency just beyond human hearing, but to a werewolf's heightened senses, it was agony. Make it stop, Roxane shrieked, clawing at her ears, blood already trickling between her fingers. Around the circle of ice, the reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic. Guards dropped to their knees, vomiting. Elder Michael collapsed, his gray robes billowing on the ice. Even Jason, who had just yielded, curled into a fetal ball, howling in silent torture as the sonic waves scrambled his equilibrium. "Muddy," Tiffany gasped, clutching the king's lapels. Muddy snulled, his eyes flashing black as he fought to remain standing, but his knees buckled. The weapon was designed specifically to target the alpha physiology. The stronger the wolf, the harder the frequency hit. "Get inside," Muddy grunted out, his voice strained with effort. "Now." Boom! The eastern wall of the citadel, a fortification that had stood for 1,000 years, exploded inward. Stone rained down like hail. Through the dissipating smoke and the swirling snow, a legion of soldiers marched into the valley. They wore sleek, silver tactical armor and masks that covered their faces entirely. "Purebloods," Mehdi hussed, forcing himself upright despite the blood running from his nose. At the head of the army walked a figure that looked more like a phantom than a man. Valeras. He was gaunt and imposing, wearing ceremonial armor etched with anti-wolf runes. In his hand, he held a staff tipped with a pulsating purple gem that seemed to be the source of the maddening sound. "The abomination breathes," Valeras announced, his voice amplified by the staff, cutting through the sonic screech. He pointed the weapon directly at Tiffany. "The silver wolf, the unclean mixture of spirit and beast, you have awakened only to die." "Over my dead body," Meti rudd. He shifted. It was a testament to his sheer willpower that he could transform, while his brain was being microwaved by the sonic weapon. The massive black wolf materialized, shaking its head to clear the disorientation, and placed itself directly between Tiffany and the approaching army. Valeras tilted his masked head. "So be it." He slammed the butt of his staff into the frozen ground. The purple gem flared blindingly bright. A concentrated beam of kinetic energy, thick as a tree trunk, arced across the ice. It was aimed at Tiffany. She was too slow. The heat of her cycle and the exhaustion from the duel had left her sluggish. She couldn't dodge. She braced for the end. But the impact never came. Meti lunged himself into the path of the beam. The energy slam hit the Alpha King midair. There was a sickening sound, the smell of singed fur and the crunch of ribs. Meti was thrown backward like a rug doll, skidding across the ice and crashing into the stone barrier at Tiffany's feet. "No!" Tiffany screamed, the sound tearing from her throat raw and terrified. She dropped to her knees beside him. Meti had shifted back to human form, his body broken and battered. A massive burn scorched his chest, and his breathing was shallow and wet. "Meti, please get up," she begged, pressing her hands to the wound, her healing magic too weak, too scattered to knit the flesh back together. Meti's hand came up, trembling, to cup her cheek. His black eyes were hazy, losing focus. "Run," he wheezed, blood bubbling past his lips. "My queen, run." Valeras laughed, a cold, metallic sound. He walked leisurely across the ice, stepping over the writhing bodies of the council members. He stopped 10 feet away, looming over the weeping girl and the fallen king. "How pathetic," Valeras sneered. "The great Alpha King brought low by a dog whistle. And you," he looked down at Tiffany with hollow, fanatic eyes, "you are nothing but a breeder. I will take you, I will extract that power from your blood, and I will use it to cleanse this world of your kind." 2 pureblood soldiers stepped forward, dragging heavy suppression chains etched with runes. Tiffany looked at the chains. She looked at Jason, cowering in the snow. She looked at Meti, bleeding out on the ice to protect her. The fear in her chest evaporated, the sorrow vanished. In their place, something ancient snapped open. It wasn't the seal this time. It was the limiter on her soul. The heat in her belly didn't fade, it ignited, merging with the rage, fueling a fire that threatened to consume the world. She stood up. The air around her began to warp. The snowflakes stopped falling, suspended in midair by the sheer pressure rising from her small form. "You heard him," Tiffany whispered. Valeras paused, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Seize her." "You heard him," she screamed. Her violet eyes were gone. In their place were two miniature suns of blinding gold. She didn't shift into a wolf. She didn't need to. She was something far worse. The sonic screech that had crippled the most powerful alphas on the continent was still tearing through the air, but Tiffany could no longer hear it. The world had gone silent. The only sound that existed was the ragged, wet rattle of Métis breathing behind her. She looked at the blood staining the ice, red, vibrant, and horrifyingly real. It was the blood of the only man who had ever looked at her without seeing a mistake. Something inside her rubcage fractured. It wasn't a bone. It was the vessel that held her mortality. The heat of the mating fever, which had been a torment only moments ago, suddenly cooled. It crystallized into something sharp and absolute. She didn't reach for the silver wolf. She didn't reach for claws or fangs. She reached deeper, past the beast, touching the raw, terrifying void where the moon goddess whispered to her chosen bloodline. Tiffany stepped forward. Her bare foot didn't touch the ice. She was hovering an inch above the ground, suspended by a sudden updraft of pure power. "Stop," Valeras commanded, raising his staff again. "Fire." The pureblood soldiers raised their rifles. But their fingers wouldn't move. They were trembling, their eyes locked on the girl who was no longer a girl. Tiffany's skin began to dissolve into light. It started at her fingertips, a pearlescent, blinding white glow that raced up her arms, turning her flesh into living starlight. Her hair floated around her face like a halo of winter wheat, defying gravity. She opened her mouth, and the air pressure in the valley dropped so sharply that the windows of the distant citadel imploded. "You dare!" The voice did not belong to Tiffany Abrams. It was a chorus of thousands, a legion of queens, warriors, and monsters layering over one another, echoing from the dawn of time. It wasn't spoken. It was vibrated into the very atoms of the air. Valerius stumbled back, the purple gem on his staff cracking under the sonic resonance of her voice. "What? What are you?" Tiffany didn't answer. She raised a hand, palm open. The glowing starlight intensified, casting long, harsh shadows across the valley. She looked at the army of silver-masked soldiers, then at Valerius, her expression devoid of humanity. It was a look of ancient, impartial judgment. "Silence," the legion spoke. A shockwave of silver energy exploded from her body. It didn't burn, it erased. The sonic screeching died instantly as every piece of electronic equipment in the valley shattered. The pureblood soldiers were lifted off their feet and slammed into the ground by an invisible, crushing gravity. Their armor crumpled like tin foil. Valerius screamed as his staff disintegrated in his hands, the purple gem turning to dust. He fell to his knees, clutching his throat, choking on the sheer density of the aura radiating from her. "Please," Valerius gasped, blood leaking from his eyes. "Have mercy." Tiffany tilted her head, her golden eyes burning with the cold indifference of a star. She floated closer, the light radiating from her so beautiful it hurt to look at, yet so terrifying that Jason and the council members shielded their faces in the snow. "You came to my home," the voice boomed, shaking the mountains. "You spilled the blood of my king, and you ask for mercy." She clenched her fist. Valerius didn't have time to scream. The invisible force around him constricted. There was a sickening, wet crunch, and the leader of the purebloods collapsed into the snow, lifeless. The remaining soldiers, witnessing their leader's instant execution, dropped their weapons. They didn't run. They couldn't. They simply pressed their foreheads into the frozen earth, praying that the goddess of death wouldn't turn her gaze toward them. Tiffany stood over the battlefield, a being of pure light, glowing against the backdrop of the storm. She was terrifying. She was beautiful. She was the apex of everything the werewolf race had forgotten they could be. But as the threat vanished, the light began to flicker. The legion voice faded, leaving only the sound of the wind. Tiffany's feet touched the ice. The glow receded, retreating beneath her skin, leaving her swaying, pale, and human once more. The godhood had burned through her reserves like a wildfire, leaving nothing but ash and exhaustion. Her knees gave out. "Tiffany!" It wasn't Maddie. It was Jason, scrambling across the ice, ignoring his own injuries. But before he could reach her, a hand grabbed his ankle. Maddie, broken and bleeding, dragged himself forward. He couldn't stand, but his growl was lethal. "Don't touch her." Tiffany didn't see them. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed into the snow, the silence of the valley ringing like a funeral bell. 3 months later, the ice in the valley had finally begun to melt, replaced by the hardy purple wildflowers of the northern spring. The citadel, once scarred by war, had been rebuilt stronger than before, its black stone walls now reinforced with silver veins that hummed with protective magic. In the great hall, the air no longer smelled of ozone and blood. It smelled of fresh beeswax, roasted meats, and the heavy, electric scent of anticipation. Tiffany stood on the balcony overlooking the courtyard. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged her frame, embroidered with silver thread that seemed to move like living starlight. She wasn't the fragile girl who had scrubbed floors anymore. Her posture was steel. Her violet eyes were clear and commanding. Behind her, a familiar rhythmic scraping sound echoed. Tiffany turned. On her knees, scrubbing a scuff mark from the stone floor, was Roxane. The former Beta's daughter wore a rough, gray servant's tunic. Her once manicured nails were broken, her hands red and chapped. She didn't look up as Tiffany approached. She didn't dare. "You missed a spot," Tiffany said softly. Roxane flinched, her shoulders hunching. She didn't spit venom. She didn't sneer. She simply dipped her rag into the bucket of icy water and scrubbed harder, terrified to meet the eyes of the woman she had once tormented. The hierarchy had righted itself. The bully was now the bottom of the pack, and she would spend the rest of her life learning the humility she had never shown others. Tiffany walked past her, feeling no satisfaction, only a cool indifference. Roxane was a ghost of the past. The heavy doors to the throne room opened. Maddie stood there. He was fully healed, though a jagged new scar ran down his chest, a permanent reminder of the day he had taken a kinetic blast to save her. He looked devastating in his ceremonial blacks, the crown of the Alpha King resting on his dark hair. But when he saw her, the regal mask slipped, replaced by a look of raw, consuming adoration. "Are you ready?" Maddie asked, extending his hand. "Always," Tiffany replied, placing her hand in his. They walked together toward the obsidian throne at the end of the hall. The room was packed with alphas from every territory on the continent. They stood in silence, heads bowed in respect. At the base of the dais, a prisoner knelt in heavy iron chains. Jason solely looked like a shadow of the man he had been. His hair was matted, his expensive suit in tatters. He had been stripped of his alpha status, his pack dissolved and absorbed into the king's dominion. When he looked up at Tiffany, his gray eyes held no arrogance, only a hollow, crushing regret. "Tiffany," Jason croaked, his voice broken, "please." Tiffany stopped on the steps. She looked down at her first mate, the man who had thrown her away because she didn't fit his image of power. "I, Queen Tiffany of the Argentum line," she announced, her voice ringing clear without the need for a shout, "sentence you to exile." Jason slumped, a sob tearing from his throat. "You banished me to the rogue lands to die alone in the cold," Tiffany said, her expression unyielding. "It seems only fitting that you walk the path you chose for me. If you survive the winter, perhaps you will find a pack that will tolerate a traitor. But you will never step foot in civilized lands again." "Take him," Maddie commanded. The guards dragged Jason away. He didn't fight. He just stared at Tiffany, watching the radiant, powerful queen he had lost, until the doors slammed shut, sealing his fate. With the past finally buried, Tiffany and Maddie ascended the dais. They didn't sit immediately. Maddie turned to her, his dark eyes intense. The mating bond which had been simmering between them for months was at its peak. He reached out, his fingers brushing the sensitive skin of her neck, right over her scent gland. "My equal," Maddie whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "My shield, my queen." "My king," Tiffany breathed, tilting her head back, baring her throat in ultimate trust. Maddie leaned down and claimed her. He sank his teeth into the junction of her neck and shoulder, sealing the bond permanently. A shockwave of golden light erupted from them, washing over the crowd, forcing every wolf in the room to their knees in instinctive submission. It wasn't a wave of fear, it was a wave of peace. The king and queen were one. Tiffany gasped as the connection snapped into place, soul to soul, heart to heart. She felt his strength, his love, his unwavering loyalty. She wasn't empty anymore. She was infinite. They sat on the obsidian throne together, hand in hand. "Long live the Queen," the High Council shouted. "Long live the Queen," the court roared back, the sound shaking the very foundations of the mountain. Tiffany looked out at the sea of bowing wolves. She squeezed Maddie's hand and he squeezed back. The invisible girl was gone. The silver wolf had come home, and the world would never be the same.